Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Um, hey, apologize about yesterday. Woke up ready to get engaged, and we lost power again yesterday. And not because of snow or anything like that, but there was a car accident that took out one of the telephone poles. Um, where we live. So it happened early in the morning, about 4 o'clock, and so power was out until 11:30. So with no internet, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So I apologize for that. I trust you guys had a great day yesterday. Ready to begin a new one today. Today is Wednesday, February the 8th, and I'm in my office today. Had an early start, and so just invite you in to my study, and appreciate the opportunity just to open up the scriptures with you today. You know, we have been in a series called Clarity, and part of this series is taking a deeper look at how Jesus is really expanding the disciples' view of what it means to be a follower, what it means to be a disciple. And Jesus kind of began this whole thing by asking them in verse 16, "Who do you say that I am?" And when they responded that he was the Son of the living God, it seems from that point on, Jesus is now intent for them to get a fuller understanding of what that meant. And so he begins by telling them that he has to go to Jerusalem, that he will be crucified, that he will be killed and raised from the dead the third day. And the first time he tells his disciples that, you might remember Peter rebukes him and says, "No, Lord, that'll never happen." And Jesus reminds him that he has his mind on the things of men rather than the things of God. And then Jesus tells them that again. And this time it says that their hearts are filled with grief. It's interesting to me that they center on the be killed part, but nobody is yet raising what it means to be raised from the dead. Perhaps for them, they are that could be an assumption, right? Like in this life to come, there was a frame of reference for them to understand that in that following this death, there would be this resurrection, but they're not seeing that Jesus is that resurrection and the life. And as Jesus begins, he gives them more and more insight and wants to make sure that they're really listening to this instruction. Well, with that, we have been then looking at this question, that's been raised here in Matthew chapter 18. And if you look at Matthew 18, verses 1 through 14, I'd like to read this for you this morning just to give us another frame of reference. And with this idea of what does life look like in God's family? What does life look like as a part of God's family? Because now Jesus is going to give us some greater insight in this discipleship, right? How we become these disciples of Jesus. He's going to tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a part of God's family, how God looks at that. So in Matthew 18, verse 1, it says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And he called a little child and had him stand among them. He said, 'I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea.'" My friends, don't you see already, like in this text, one of the things that Jesus is pointing out is he uses the illustration of this little child. But what he's really talking about is not just the little child. He's talking about those who are following after him, need to display what he says here is a humbleness, right? Look what he says in verse 4. Whoever humbles himself like this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The child was compliant to Jesus' request, right? And Jesus is saying, look, I want you to humble yourself like this child. Because that sense of humility, where you're being taught, right? You're being open to instruction. That is what qualifies to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Is how well I am responding, right, to this direction, this guidance that God is giving me. I want to be great in the kingdom of heaven is because I am not only hearing his word, but I am beginning to put this into practice. So this child standing there is a reminder that the greatest in the kingdom is it's not about power, right? It's not about superior intellect. It's not about great gifting. It's none of those things. It's saying that the one who is greatest in the kingdom are those who humble themselves. And then he's looking at this little child. He says, like this child that stands before you. So it was just a visual that Jesus was using really to talk then about disciples, right? But then notice what Jesus goes on to say. He says here, whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. So again, the little child is being used as an illustration of what? Of those who are following after Jesus. So it says, if I welcome fellow believers then, right? If I am welcoming, whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. So then there is something about this family, this gathering of those who have now humbled themselves to the point where they are following after Jesus. It's saying that we ought to make room for people like that in our circle, right? And then he says something pretty sharp. He says, if anyone causes one of these little ones, and who's the little ones? The little ones are the people who are coming in his name, the little ones who have humbled themselves. He says, if anyone causes these little ones, my children, right, who believe in me, and then the word there is to sin, and that word there for sin is the Greek word scandalon. It speaks of a trigger that's found on a trap that's used to load with bait and allure, animals into that they might be captured. So this idea of setting a trap, and that trigger is this scandalon. It calls people to fall, right? It's a matter of entrapment. So the Bible translators here in this context use the word to sin. Maybe you have a Bible translation that says to fall or to stumble. The idea is that you're taking this person down. They are being entrapped. And so he says, if anyone causes these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would have been better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Some of you who are listening this morning may be aware of the ministry of Child Evangelism Fellowship. Child Evangelism Fellowship, I've had the privilege of speaking at a number of their conferences. I have traveled across this country and been their keynote speaker for their weeks of enrichment. I have been at part of their fundraising events that they have had across the country. It has been I have been amazed at the amount of countries that they have been in with their materials. You might have grown up with the wordless book, where the colors there were a book of just colors that were symbolizing, like white for righteousness, black for sin, red for redemption, blue for heaven, right? All of these were just a visual to help people to understand this gospel story. Well, the reason why I say that is because when you go to their headquarters, out in front, they have this landscaped area that has flags of all the countries that they are in, and they are nearly in every country in the world. It is amazing the outreach that Child Evangelism Fellowship has. But right in the center of this display with all these flags is this huge millstone, and it's just it looks like a big donut, right, with a hole in the middle of it. And it was used to crush grain, right? People would, either animals or people themselves would just roll this stone around, and it would have a way of separating the wheat from the chaff. On that millstone is this verse, and it stands. Excuse me, and it stands right in the centerpiece of their headquarters, and it reminds them of this very text, right? If anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Well, that's strong language. When you read that text, what do you think that's saying about how God feels about his children? You know, what does life look like in God's family? It definitely means that his children are of value to him. He's saying, you mess with my kids, you'd be better off with a millstone hung around your neck and thrown into the sea. God is not going to let, harm come to his children that is not being recompensed. God has your back. And I think that sometimes we think erroneously that coming to know Jesus means that man, if I just live the right way and I just do the right things, I develop the right habits, that my life will be, smooth and content. And honestly, I wish it was like that. But what you're describing is heaven, not life in a world that is broken. And in this world, think about this. Jesus, he lived the perfect life. Jesus fulfilled the will of the Father. He came to complete his tasks. And yet Jesus understood that for him, the Savior, the Messiah that was coming into the world, must first what? Be killed and then be raised to life. He would suffer, be betrayed. See, what I'm saying to you is like life in this world is going to come with its challenges. That's why early on in the Gospel of Matthew, remember the Beatitudes? When Jesus is looking at on a mass of humanity that have come to bring their sick, their dying, right? Those who were afflicted on so many levels, and Jesus is trying to bring comfort to them. And he tells them, he says, look, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for you shall be comforted. He's talking about what this kingdom of heaven is going to mean for them. And one of the last of the Beatitudes is, blessed are you when men persecute you for righteousness' sake, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. He says, blessed are you when men insult you, persecute you, falsely accuse you on account of me. He says, rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. And so did they persecute the prophets before you. See, this is Jesus' way of saying this world is broken, which is why it needs a Savior. But he says here, you better think twice about messing with my kids because I'm going to have their back. And then, in a way that just underscores that that Jesus is serious about this, and this is one of those areas that I just love these passages because they just remind me again that Jesus is always, you know, Jesus is always about telling us the truth. And notice what he says here in verse 7. He says, "Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin." Right? Woe to the things that cause people to stumble, to fall, to be entrapped. He's not pleased with it. But notice what he says. He says, such things must come. And why? Because we live in a world that at present is woke and broke. This is a world that is at odds with God's will and his purposes. And you see it on multiple levels around you. And it can be so disheartening sometimes. And if we're not careful, we actually sometimes think that the devil's winning. But trust me, you remember that old song, he's got the whole world in his hands? Yeah, that's Jesus. And his patience right now is such that he's providing opportunity for this gospel to be proclaimed, for us to maintain this witness in the world around us. But Jesus is saying, he says, listen, woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. This world is going to be judged. And he says, and such things must come. But woe to the man through whom they come. There is going to be a day of judgment that will be meted out. And that sounds harsh on one level, but don't you want evil to be recompensed? Don't you want righteousness to be rewarded? I don't know about you, but I can't wait to get to heaven where it says there is no more of this conflict. There is no more of this anxiety. There is no more of this worry or sickness or death or pain or tears. No, I can't wait for this to be fully redeemed. And to recognize that people that they thought they had their foot up on everybody, now all of a sudden, it's payback time. Jesus is very clear that it's not our position to apply that sense of vengeance. He says, don't seek revenge, right? Don't seek to mete out the vengeance yourself. It says, God will repay. And you know what? When I read texts like this, it reminds me that God can do a much better job than I can. And if I'm not careful, in my attitude, I can become so hardened that I'm becoming more like the world instead of being the answer to this world's problems. To being a light that shines, suddenly now my light gets a little bit dimmer because I've allowed the adversities around here to develop a bitter spirit within me, a calloused heart. And how is that helping anybody? And how's that helping me? Now, Jesus understands. Woe to the world. Woe to the man through whom these things come. Even though for a season, this is going to happen. But then notice what he says to his followers. These are the little children. He says, if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into the fire of hell. Whoa. Again, really strong language. Jesus is trying to make his point, and he's trying to get our attention. Here he has this little child standing in front of him and saying, we need to demonstrate a humility, that demonstrates that we are listening and putting these things into practice that he's teaching us. That we need to be seeking after him and not thinking that we, not being prideful, right? Like we have all the answers. And then you think Jesus is advocating that we maim ourselves, that we cripple ourselves physically? I took people to a passage on Sunday when I preached this passage, and I said, can you go back to the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus talks about adultery? And then he said that you've heard that it was said, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I tell you, if any man looks at a woman with lust in his heart, he has committed it already. So where is the lustfulness taking place? It's taking place inside a person's heart. You see, what Jesus is saying to you and me in this text is that the way we could demean, women, right, is we conjure up all these stories in our minds that at first are conceived in one's heart. So can I ask you then, Jesus went on to say, they says, so if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Well, if I was to cut off my hand and gouge out my eye, what does that do about the condition of my heart? See, it just removing these members of my body, that's not what Jesus is saying. He's using strong language here to demonstrate to you and to me that we ought to be seeking first this kingdom of heaven, right? That we ought to be walking on this narrow way. That in this particular text, the way in which we are treating our fellow, brothers and sisters in this family ought to be one in which, we are not causing them to stumble or to fall. Life in this kingdom means that we have to look at the children of God the way God looks at those children. And God cares for them. God's going to protect them. God is telling you and me, be very careful about how you treat one another. Because if there's any propensity in you to do them harm, you'd be better off cutting your legs off, cutting your hands off, cutting your eyes out. Now, here's the thing. In the few moments that remain, I want to take you to a text because I want you to understand that in our text there is this mention of eyes and hands and feet. And those represent something within this biblical culture that God has been developing from the very beginning. So that these words of eyes and hands and feet, they are loaded terms. And Jesus, he is the embodiment of the scriptures, right? He says, don't think I've come to abolish them. I've come to fulfill them. He says, nothing is going to pass away from the scriptures until it's been achieved. So I want you to see through the book of Proverbs what this is all about. Because on the one hand, the eyes, when you read through Proverbs, the eyes, and it's like this in other passages, but I'm just picking the book of Proverbs for an illustration. You read through the book of Proverbs and you'll see that the eyes have everything to do with the way in which I view the world, the way I view myself. The eyes, it becomes this lens by which I am drawing conclusions, right, from what I see. The hands have everything to do with the things that I do, the actions that I am manifesting in this world. And feet often are used as a metaphor for the paths that I have chosen. So the way I view the world, the things I do in this world with the hands, and the paths I choose in this world are my feet. So let me take you to a place that I want you to see in Proverbs chapter 6. And in Proverbs chapter 6, why don't we pick it up at verse 12. It says here, and I want you to notice how eye and feet and hands, all of these things are kind of brought together here, right? So watch. It says a scoundrel and a villain who goes about with a corrupt mouth, who winks with his eye, right? So what is he doing? Right? He's, it could be filled with pride, right? Like I know something you don't, right? He winks with his eye. He signals with his feet. He motions with his fingers. Who plots evil with deceit in his heart. He always stirs up dissension. Do you see this scoundrel? Like, come on, we could put names to this. We could put faces to this. We live in a world that is demonstrating this on multiple levels. People who are being deceptive, trying to be coy, right? Who are signaling with their feet is this way of saying, look, you're trying to cause people to go in a path where they shouldn't be trotting, right? Motioning with your fingers, using your hands to cause people to engage in other kinds of activities. They plot evil with deceit in their heart. This isn't to build you up. This is to tear you down. And it says, therefore, disaster will overtake him in an instant. He will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. See, because God is always the one who is weighing these scales. Listen to this, this proverb here in 16 through 19. He says, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him, right? This is 7 is always this perfect number, right? This is God's view. This is what he hates. Haughty eyes, prideful eyes, that maybe view themselves as being better than others, who view themselves without having the discernment that God is bringing into a person's life, who view themselves as having it all together and perhaps not needing any guidance whatsoever from God. No kind of instruction, no kind of training. No, I got this covered. Thank you very much. No, God says, I hate haughty eyes. Why? Because he says, I want you to be like children who humble themselves, who are doing good, not causing someone to stumble. You want to know how God what life looks like in God's family? It should be marked out with a humility. It should be marked out by acts of righteousness, the things that people are doing that are good. Notice here, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. See what I mean about the hands are always indicative of actions. And in this case, God says, I hate when people use their hands to do evil things, shedding innocent blood. A heart that instead of being set on God, right, on what he desires, this heart is devising wicked schemes. Feet, quick to rush into evil. Talk about this path again, you see. They're rushing down into doing evil. Your feet are taking you down paths that are going to lead to your undoing. Why do I do that? Why am I allowing my eyes to present a view of myself and the world that is contrary to the things of God? Why am I using these hands in ways that undermine the very work that God would have me to do? He's saying, listen, if you're doing harm, it'd be better for you to have those hands cut off than to be thrown into these fires of hell. He says, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. What did Jesus just tell us? It says, if anyone, he says, woe to the world that leads people to sin. He says, and woe to the man through whom it comes. He says such things must come, but woe to the one through whom they come. Yeah, why? Because God hates the man who stirs up dissension among brothers. We should be for each other, not against each other. So you look here, and just the instruments of this body, for in Proverbs, you can see how they're being used now to speak not only of a worldview and actions and paths that we choose. So when Jesus is saying to them, look, you're better off to have these things cut off or gouged out than to do harm, because God hates these things. And there's going to be a judgment that follows those who are pursuing this kinds of scandalon, right? This kind of entrapment. Well, tomorrow we'll look at some more passages that just give us a greater indication of what Jesus is saying here. And then I'm going to turn the page, and we're going to take on Jesus' expression when he talks about them being thrown into hell. What is he saying here about hell? And I hope that you'll tune in the next couple of days, and we'll work at that together. So seize the day. Be mindful as you go through your day today. How am I using these eyes, these hands, these feet, this heart, these lips? What am I really listening to in the course of my day? I hope that more and more this vision of what Jesus is calling us to, it just causes you to seize the day with the knowledge that God is good all the time. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Share these broadcasts with your friends. Let's build a community of people whose hearts and minds are really set on things above. God bless you, my friends. Enjoy so much being a part of this. And Lord willing, we'll spend some more time again tomorrow. God bless.